Hello. So it's been a very intriguing double game week, and things become interesting too in fantasy football. The template becomes shattered as wild cards and triple captains diverge, plus a smashing of bench boosts also get involved. It's an exciting time for sure, as strategies are embarked on which vary, setting up an end of the season which will hopefully mirror the title race and being exciting and pulsating rather than being a foregone conclusion for weeks, except for the fact that I'll definitely underperform due to some harsh 50-50s in FPL, which are going to slap me in the face some point or another. Let's make no bones about it. We are Who Got the Assist, or tonight I am. I'm Tom, WGTA underscore FPL on Twitter, and my usual co-host is Anthony at FPL Stag. It's his last pod next week, actually, as I mentioned just a bit. But as you can probably tell if you're watching on YouTube, I'm joined by no one tonight, except for my trusty pint of beer, as I smash through a solo babble as the week rumbles on. So I'm recording on a Wednesday night for my own convenience more than anything else. I've got early meetings on a Friday. Friday? Who puts in early meetings on a Friday, dear me? Meaning I can't record tomorrow night. This means that I know the results of Wednesday night's games, but I don't know what happens tomorrow. So I don't know that Arsenal beat Wolves 3-1 with a Saka hat trick, Ramsdale saving a penalty, and Kilman nodding in the consolation for Wolves. Today, I'm going to basically give you a quick update on how this week's gone, a little bit of the objective reminders, but very, very quickly. I'm going to skip the mini league updates and the market forces for this one and head straight into community questions, mostly, of course, revolving around the free hit, to use, not use, who to pick, who not to pick, and a few other assorted tidbits. First, into the weekly update. So, the games have just finished, and I've got 134 net, 138 -4. I went with just the -4 this week. I was looking at other things, but I ended up just doing David De Gea, Bruno, and Jota. They all went out for Ramsdale, Salah, and Saka. I had a lot of thoughts last week, as mentioned on the pod with Anima. I was considering that bench boost for quite a while, but I spoke to a few good folk, like guys on my Slack, friends like Karam, Jack FPL, and Libero, although the latter that did actually bench boost, but with good reason. And I just came to the conclusion that, triple captain, just go for it. I mean, it's probably only just me. You can kind of overthink that one, but there I did try to overthink it. And I'm just glad I didn't go too deep into the woods of calculating Salah's X minutes and likelihood to be rested. I mean, my bench ended up being Foster with his 6-pointer, Dean with 2, Buendia with 3 because he was subbed off just before Watford scored, and whatever Marcelli ends up with tomorrow. So Salah's triple captain would have beaten that. So it probably was a good thing that I did triple captain. It would have been classic me, to be fair, to miss the haul. Saving grace, maybe, was that I wild carded 2 weeks ago, or I might have done it, or I might have kind of dropped into kind of wild carding or doing something else like that. And I'm sure, even though most wild cards have done all right, like Van Dijk coming through, Cancelo and Bowen blanking, I'm sure I'd have included some harebrained picks over obvious ones to consign me to a terrible defeat. The last thing I considered this week was Edouard out for Wakehorst on a -8. But I thought, no, I'll give Eddie a chance. And he was subbed on by Paddy V in the 92nd minute of the second game. Cheers, Patrick. Legend. Weird week this week, as I mentioned earlier. Lots of new strategies were born out of the Premier League dropping fixtures on Friday. Lots of wild cards, as noted. Salah didn't quite get there in terms of wiping out their gains overall, but fairly successful. So, yeah, I'm on 138 with -4. Takes me up to 200k. A decent enough rank. Ramsdale, Saka, and Kilman to go. So I'm expecting to wind up on 145, something like that. Very nice. All down to Salah, though, really. The rest of the team was pretty pants. Ramsdale's on 2 at the moment. Foster's on 6. I'm hoping for him to outperform old Ben tonight. Tomorrow night, but it's probably tonight your time. Trent missed the first game, a mere clean sheet in the second. Prayers and thoughts should be offered to Anthony, who did triple captain him, unfortunately, as he was mentioning last week. He did go through with it, so it's been a pretty tough one for him. Kilman's on 2 for the moment. Robertson bagged a nice 13 pointer. He missed the first game, made up for it tonight. 2 assists, a pen assist in the corner for Van Dijk in the final minute, which took him into nabbing a bonus too, which is very nice. So 13 points for 1 week, and Cancelo blanked the 1 point. The wildcards got away with that one. In midfield, Salah, obviously the monster, triple captain with 84. Could have been better though. Haven't seen the game, but friend of the pod, Alex Ball, who was watching in New Zealand, deserves a shout out too. Actually, he included Mane this week for a bit of a monster score. Said Salah missed a few good chances, as he did versus Norwich. So really, it should have been a 100-point triple captain. But hey, 84 is good in anyone's books. I think anybody would have taken that at the start of the game week. More than taken it. Ripped your hand off, ripped your shoulder off, ripped the right side of your abdomen off, if you've given your right hand out, of course. And elsewhere in my team, Bowen blanked. He did hit the bar, and there are a few suggesting a potential sale. We'll talk about that later. And again, the wild card's got away with that one. And up top, Josh King, 3 points, subbed in the 50th minute. I mean, the only pain is I'm on a free hit and I can't send him immediately. And the same goes for Oddison Bloody Edward, as I mentioned earlier on. Sorry, taking a sip of my drink, but just the 16-point swing there, not going with Vague Horse over him. And this week, obviously, it would have paid off with the hit. I'm not sure what Edouard's done to Vieira. He was doing all right beforehand, but something's definitely gone on there, hasn't it? And obviously, he didn't need him tonight with a 4-1 victory, but subbing on basically at the final whistle is a bit of an insult, to say the least, to the man. And Kane finally at 15 points, a majestic performance versus City. I did say in the early stages I was out in the local shopping centre buying a suit, ever so coolly, or not really, because I haven't really got one anyway. But I did say in those early stages when he assisted the assist of the Kulusevski's goal, it was classic Kane. The last 2 weeks he's been terrible. Captained him immediately after my wild card, of course, against Southampton, and he blanked. But the brace was brilliant. When I caught up with it, and yeah, fully deserved those 13 points. There were 2 points against Burnley tonight. A bit of an underperformance, to say the least, but as friend of the pod, James Carroll, quips earlier on, there's probably not a Spurs fan alive who's surprised that Spurs contrived to beat the best team in the land 3-2 and then go on to lose to Burnley. So yeah, all in all, up to 200k again, 100k to go before I get to some semblance of respectability. And yeah, Kilman, Ramsdale, and Saka to go tomorrow night. Objectives wise, I did what Mikel's captaincy algorithm told me to do. I captained Salah, of course. I'm a bit disappointed because I should have taken hit for Edouard, really, to Weghorst. I didn't do it. So maybe I failed the second objective this time. And I'm not going to count that Form 1 for now because I think it's probably a bit rubbish. Skipping the Min League, skipping Market Forces. We'll do that next week on Anthony's final podcast. And we're into listener questions. So, yeah, I think there's actually a couple of things I should mention before we get into this. So the first thing is that please get in a correspondence for Anthony if you can. That's who got the assist at gmail.com. Please write in something just to kind of see him off. Anything you want to say about his time on the pod, missing his dulcet Hibernian tones, anything like that. I should massively appreciate if you use that medium just to send him a message. If not, I've got a few backups lined up, but just in case you want to say something as well. And there's a couple of meetups going on the next month. I'm heading to the London meetup on the 12th of March. That'll be via Nima, who was on the pod last week. At FPL Meeks is the handle on Twitter. It should be really, really good. Looking forward to it. Seen a few people saying, what, I'm not sure about coming. I'll be on my own. I might need to be, I might have a friend or something like that. To be honest, just come along. It's really cool. As I've said a few times, FPL is a fantastic equalizer. Everyone's there, just having fun, talking about a game that we all love. We all speak fluent FPL. We all speak fluent football, or some of us do anyway. And most of all, we always have a great time. It's such a welcoming environment overall. There's no need for all this other sort of accoutrements that other events do. Just meeting up with loads of friends, people you've seen before. And if you're new, you'll quickly make friends and you'll just get chatting. And it's just such a good event. It's well worth coming to. Just dropping in, even if you can. Someone somewhere will come and find you. And you can pop me a message, you can pop Nima a message, anybody on the group a message saying, I'm coming. Can someone come and find me and say hello to me? And we'll definitely do that. Don't be afraid to do that. I know it can be a bit daunting coming to one of these things, but it's not that there's we're the cool kids or anything. We're just a load of bearded FPL people. Well, the men at least. The ladies, there are ladies there as well, and they're very nice, but they're not bearded. But hey, anyway. And finally, I'm heading to Bristol on the 19th of March, so the week after. That'll be for blank game week 30. And I'm looking at getting a venue set up, but I'll finally be heading to the West Country after not being able to go a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, that'll be the Saturday, the 19th of March. I'll get a tweet out about that. But if you want to come along and you aren't on Twitter or something like that, do let me know, or kind of keep an ear out for updates. I'll tell you where it will be and what sort of time, but I suspect it will be, I think the Arsenal game is first up, so I'll definitely be watching that one. I know that, for example, Tom Campbell, my friend, is coming along to that. Anyway, let's get into the key questions then. The first one is free hits. Do I play it? So Nick Maynard and Simon at Ngawa Chairman, who basically ask, does a -4 to get to starting 11, even if the team isn't perfect, make sense rather than using the remaining free hit? Nick says, exactly that. Does a -4 to fill the starting 11 this game week, even if the team isn't perfect, makes sense. And Simon says, should we stop following the FPL Twitter herd and be more cautious with our chip strategy? For example, if you've got 11 players in your team already, do you need a -4 to sort your team out? Well, I'm on my third free hit at the moment, as I'll discuss more over the next sort of group of questions. But I'll, of course, do my best not to censor myself totally on my team and turn this into a pod about free hit and who you should pick and who you shouldn't, because there's nothing worse than somebody giving views based on their own situation. I'll try to give a more balanced one using questions to help me out. But in answer to Nick and Simon's initial questions, the overriding idea is obviously always it depends on your team. Just to give some context, I free hitted personally because I brought in two Arsenal this week. Remember, I brought in Saka and Ramsdale alongside my three Liverpool players, and I had Martinelli already. So that gave me six players who are out this week. I thought it was worth free hitting. I've got six players now in situ for game week 30 and also game week 28. So after this free hit period, by that time, I'll know who's playing game week 30 because the FA Cup games will have gone. So I'm able to kind of get a better idea of what to do to bulk up the fix ahead of those fixtures. A good example of an ideal candidate to bring in might be an extra Wolves player, for example. So Jimenez or even Pedence or Pedro Neto, who made his welcome return, could be worth including. They've got a double in 28 and they've got a guaranteed game in 30. Southampton could be that team. Burnley could be that team. So big Wout Weghorst could make his way in. And if Arsenal get that double in 28, that's a bit iffy at the moment. Listening to Planet FPL on the way home from work earlier on, and there's a lot up in the air right now, which makes me kind of commenting on it a bit worthless. But they could be an option for some people too next week, or Chelsea as well in game week 28. So there's a lot of news in advance of game week 28, which should help us make transfers. But in terms of free hitting this week, and I'll come on to who should be concerned about shortly. Perhaps I had only 9 men, so it was worth doing it for me. But it might not be the case for you. Like Nick, this was my remaining free hit, but I'm able to navigate the complex period as it stands because I'm in decent position ahead of game week 30. This week, if you can field 10, 11, cover off some key men, and you think there's a better place to utilize your free hit going forward, then as Simon mentions, certainly shouldn't just join the herd. You simply need to do your own thing. I guess time to kind of go off one of my tangents here, but it's worth mentioning too about FPL Twitter and the kind of magnification effect this can have on behavior. I'm a really bad example of this. I've been dislodged from many a valid strategy by worries about what the crowd are up to, FOMO versus really thinking about what's right for me and my team and my strategy and where I seem to be sitting. And in hindsight, I've lived to regret it every single time. There's little worse in an FPL sense, I find, than feeling like you FOMOed yourself into something stupid at the expense of points and rank gain just to fit in with what you perceive everybody else to be doing. Okay, it looks like FPL Twitter is all free hitting right now, but just remember this is due to it being a key talking point for so many, and that will be dominating the discourse. That's just the way it is across socials right now. And it's a bit like if we'd have got the fixture announcements last week a little bit earlier than the Friday, like wildcards would have been all anyone was talking about everywhere. So I wouldn't be too concerned by the chatter if you can kind of just shut it out. As I said last week, I think we've reached the tipping point in the season where generic advice doesn't quite apply as universally as it did. We've embarked on a period where individualistic strategies are key, and you can broadly group by chips, I guess, in terms of what people are doing, in terms of chips remaining, chips used, and those dictate, I suppose, the individual pathways that can lead to different outcomes and will lead to different outcomes over the course of the season. Don't be afraid simply to look at FPL Twitter and think, nah, actually, this doesn't apply to me. I'm not too bothered by this. Even if you respect the person, of course, giving the tip or something like that. Just for context, this week the official FPL said the other day that 99,000 free hit chips have been played. So let's call it 100,000. Well, how many is that? How big a proportion is that of the player base? Well, Fantasy Football Fix estimates that 47.1% of squads are inactive at the moment. But I think there's a huge scope within the remaining 52.9% for 1 week heroes, super casuals, and value chasers to be in there. I mean, I spoke with Tom Campbell, who works with Fix, about kind of what the true number of active managers is probably going to be right now, who are playing the proper game, like in contention and doing all the things that all active managers do. Think about the things active managers do. And we both came to a kind of a round ballpark estimate of about 1 million managers who are truly active, playing in the truest sense. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's 100,000 free hits played. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 1 in 10 managers at the moment who are currently active, but probably something, like 20%, maybe even 25% who are active once we hit Friday. If you aren't free hitting them, what do you do? So, in answer to Nick and Simon's question, if you don't need to free hit, you don't have to. If you think you can weather it, then you don't need to. Alternative strategies, though, are a question which is out there. Lee Bishop asks if alternative strategies might work, for example, free hitting in 28 or 29. He recognizes, he said to me in a follow up, that it's very team dependent, but where's the gain in being the same? There's a lot of ground for me to make up. I feel you. That's exactly what I was just saying. And Benny Blanco was also weighing up at wildcarding later on. He's saying, he's looking at perhaps going in, game week of 30, maybe before. His current plan is wildcard 28. All just to mention as well, Benny is running the North versus South game week 39 event in aid of Street Child United. So all the profits and proceeds go to charity, which is very nice. It's a football match between 11 from the North and South, comprised of FPL community members, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Saturday, the 28th of May in Birmingham. You can find him at Benny Blanco 40. Sorry, Benny _ Blanco 40 on Twitter, and find out more about this on GW game week GW39 North versus VS, that is south.co.uk, all one word. That's GW39 North VS south.co.uk if you want to find out more about that. Anyway, in terms of later strategies, so if you aren't free hitting this week, these are obviously highly dependent situation again, but there's a bit of merit here. There really is. So, for example, you may have no Southampton, Villa, Wolves, or Newcastle, and those teams are obviously doubling soon. And you may feel like, free hitting 28, maybe your ticket to covering these lads. Or in 29, you may be thinking, what, I want to get, Arsenal players or Everton players, or maybe Newcastle players, Everton players, really. And Chelsea may also have a double in 28. I think that seems to be dependent on if Leicester beat Randers in the Conference League. Again, is it worth it, as Lee mentions? Maybe. Equally, as Benny is implying, you may want to wildcard in 28 to cover this off and perhaps get your bench boost out of the way in game week 29. If you want a team with, a triple Newcastle or something like that, with Dan Burn and Joe Willock and ASM sat on your bench, something like that. I mean, I'm considering using my my bench boost next couple of weeks, actually, for what it's worth. Game week 36, I think, is meant to be the big one. And that's also a bit of a damp squib, isn't it? I mean, it's full of rotation and uncertainty. And I guess now we've got at least a modicum of confidence about who's starting, who won't be. There's a lot of key men as well who will be comprising that wild card or bench boost. For example, the likes of Burn, Willock, and ASM, as I mentioned earlier on. Those guys can be brought in and make it work quite nicely. There's a Southampton guy as well, which I'll come on to in a bit, and obviously some semblance of Villa as well. I guess this links back to what I said previously, though. Like it's perfectly okay to have your own way to go on all this, and more often than not, you'll find your own scenario is very different to other people's. Bit of a sidebar, actually, a thought that just occurred to me. But I'd advise now, just don't put your team on Twitter as often as you used to if you are somebody who puts your team out and fishes for help. Like loads of people, I've been noticing this more and more as our fortunes and as our strategies have diverged, are just terrible at putting themselves in your shoes, aka empathy, and instead will advise you from their own perspective. Like, I put my team out a few weeks ago and all I got was, why no X? Why are you doing Y? Why aren't you doing Z? And I guess this is just true, especially of blokes. There can be a bit of a deficit in empathy, which means that, quick takes that people give you provide very little value to you when you're canvassing on opinion online in that public space. And I've personally just stopped with my team on Twitter now, unless it's a fait accompli. I've done all the thinking myself. And obviously, in the context of this podcast, I don't mind, mentioning where I am. And I assume you listeners are all empathetic individuals, sensies, as John Dorian would have it. But I think for me, a good piece of advice was via FPL Salah, aka Abdul, when we had him on this year. He was saying in his lovely Scottish brogue, which I'm not even going to try to replicate, that you should have your trusted few individuals that you can ask opinions of in DM, WhatsApp, or whatever, and have that expansive conversation on there where you can lay out your situation, say what your options are, and ask for takes in that sort of more considered way. If you're getting quick fire answers on Twitter, it's short term stuff doesn't help. And also, just remember that if someone does look at your team and goes, "Oh, no X," or "Why this" about one particular individual, just ignore those, because it means the rest of your team's okay. It's just one person that maybe they don't particularly like. Anyway, I digress massively. Let's go on to free hit itself and talk about a few bits and pieces surrounding that. And as I mentioned earlier on, I'm not going to be focusing in completely on the free hit, and I'll find a way of kind of just I guess weaving in what happens if you're not on free hit, etc., etc. In order to talk about the free hit, actually, I'm going to go into a momentous decision and make a momentous decision, I should probably say, which will no doubt be documented in WGTA Wiki for years to come, which is to move transfers and captains from the end to talk about here, and show my free hit team will talk about it. That's because I am on a free hit, and I guess you might want to know what team I've got, what's in my mind, and as I've mentioned, I'll draw on the community questions to help illustrate all of this sort of stuff. So I'm sat on a near variant of the template right now. That's not particularly surprising. For those not on Twitter, the wise ones out there, the Twitter template 11 goes as follows: Pope in goal, Livramento, me and Cancelo, the back three, Bruno, Mahrez, Sterling and Son in midfield, and up front, Kane, Broja and Weghorst, with Weghorst being the captain. I've got 9 of that 11. The only small changes I've got I've got Bednarek over Livramento and Tarkovsky to the me at the moment. The ones I'd say are probably the core group for many, like the ones that I see in pretty much every single iteration of a free hit, are Pope, Cancelo, Bruno, Mahrez, Son, Kane, Broja, and Weghorst. So 8 players, all free hitters will probably own, plus a Burn defender who's likely going to be me for most, plus Southampton or United defender, plus decision to make about whether you go for double seated defence or double seated midfield. I think most people are going for Sterling at the moment. Plus, if you don't go for that if you go for that double defence, City double defence, maybe there'll be like a midfielder that would open up. Having a second United player like Sancho, who I'll speak about in just a bit. Ignored as well. West Ham versus Wolves. So Bowen's not appearing. As I mentioned, there's a question about him later on. The likes of form team Newcastle away to Brentford aren't appearing in anyone's teams at the moment. And Palace, who just dismantled Watford 4-1, are at home to Burnley. So maybe like Zaha should be in with more a shout than they are at the moment. The first thing to preface everything with is that randomness and chance here are massive. It's a 1 week fling. It's not a long term commitment, and you'll find that kind of luck, chance, variance, randomness, like all those things are going to be magnified this week. They're going to be absolutely huge and have an acute impact on how things turn out. And a really good question this week comes from non-free hitter Alan at FPL Diagnosis. He says, "Are there any words of comfort for those of us not on the free hit, and who should we be scared of?" There aren't too many, I don't think. As I mentioned, the ones who are probably the key threats are Burnley, who I mentioned shortly, Broja, who I think you should all be able to buy, even if you're not on free hit. City, maybe a bit more difficult, especially if you sold Cancelo on a wild card. Bruno, I suspect you sold him for Salah as well. Kane and Son, you probably own one of them. And I can imagine you'd be contesting with these players anyway, with other players in your single game week team. So I wouldn't be too concerned. But if you have your free hit and you're not playing it here, I think you should content yourself with the notion in terms of those comforting words that you're being with a feast when there's a famine for others later down the line. For non-free hitters, and for Alan specifically, I'll do I'm not on a free hit. How worried should I be rating throughout my chat? So whenever I talk about a particular team or a particular kind of area, most about particular teams, I'll fill that in as well to give you a more 360 view of what's going on. So the first question really on teams and things like that is from Nikki S. He says, Man City assets, the key ones. What are the best ones to free hit in? If you are free hitting, Mahrez, I think that's the likeliest lad for a lot of people. That's really understandable. I've got him too. He's that sort of quixotic cocktail of being well priced 8.7, has that brilliant expected goal involvement per 90. I think it's 0.83. Second only to fellow North African Mo Salah. And he's top for XGI over the last 6 matches played, not game weeks matches. And he has that element of exoticism too. What I mean by that is that you're rarely going to own Mahrez in real FPL, but he's a proper free hit pick. He's a one-off explosive differential pickup. I just realised I used the word quixotic on a podcast. I may have even pronounced it wrong. I know what I mean. I write it a lot just to try to sound clever. I'm not sure whether to be proud or embarrassed. I'm probably embarrassed. I'm really sorry about that. Anyway, so yes, Mara's in for me. He's on pens too, but Everton have only given away but one penalty this season. Cancelo as well seems a bit of a shoe-in. I don't need to explain why. And then it's probably where you go in terms of that third City player. I don't think there's any doubt that free is going to be the basic complement for the free hit. You may think otherwise, of course, but yeah, I think that's probably going to be where most people go. I mean, you could go for the defence to allow you another big hitter midfielder like Sancho, who I mentioned in a bit, or double on the city midfield. I guess defence wise, you're hoping for a Laporte bullet header or trying to, save money for the likes of Walker or maybe even hoping Stones comes in. I think Diaz is probably a little bit too expensive, but if you've got mad team value or you just really, really want the expected minutes, then that is absolutely fine to do. I personally think double midfield is the way to go. I'd much rather be relying on two Man City attacking players. I mean, obviously Cancelo, yes, he's an attacker, blah blah blah. Midfield wise, I'd be much more inclined to rely on two attackers from Man City in that midfield than, say, United. Although Watford did just get absolutely spanked by Crystal Palace, and United are looking a lot better. Maybe I'll revisit that, but that's kind of how what my default is, I suppose. And most people have homed in on Sterling there. You've got the Mahrez midfield, as I like to call it. I've got him busting there at the moment. You can see why. He's third for expected goal involvement over the last six, and that hat trick against Norwich is in recent memory. But this creates a big problem for me, fitting him in. With the twin plate setup, my two subs are yes, Ben Johnson and Yves Bissouma, with a 3.9 million goalkeeper and Shimikas making up the bench. I mean, admittedly, I could get, Angus Gunn in and bin off Tarkovsky for me. But I quite like Tarkovsky, so I'll come on to him just a bit. And I'd assume I get some advanced warning about if Pope's not going to play. But yeah, if I've just got Ben Johnson, who admittedly most West Ham fans do think is going to come in because Shufal is not going to be around, and Basuma as being the two players that are in situ to help me, I'm a bit concerned about that. Obviously, there's the mantra that if you don't shoot, you don't score. But that I get anxiety looking at that bench. Like if I get pepped or something else goes wrong, like I'm relying on Ben Johnson playing against Wolves, and then ultimately relying on Basuma against Aston Villa, who doesn't really do anything pretty much ever unless you get like the odd 30-yard screamer or something like that. I guess there's also a bit of pure speculation about this too. It's always going to be speculation. There are a couple of things. So if Sterling is hauled off Sterling was hauled off versus Spurs, sorry, after an anonymous performance. Could he be replaced by someone? I mean, I'm not sure about that, but no, potentially. City fans think that he's going to play the next game at the moment. And Foden was looking very off versus Spurs, and obviously there's that kind of unsavory video we saw of his personal life when he was being attacked by people in the nightclub. I wonder if, for example, Gundogan or Bernardo Silva, I know Bernardo Silva, scars, Nam style flashbacks, many people, may be worth looking at on a 1 week basis. I think that's purely because with Mahrez, you've got X explosion. So maybe it's worth pairing that with X-Mins, with the likes of Bernardo Silva, Gundogan, perhaps a bit more iffy, obviously down to jump the wave, Emma's predictions there. But I mean, if Foden does get a rest, for example, that false nine role, either of them are capable of playing that role, and that could free up a lot of resource. It definitely, for example, would mean that you can afford a bench which isn't too aggressively mere individuals. And in the 1 week scenario, what's to say that Bernardo or Gundogan won't outscore Sterling? Gundogan's per 90 expected goal involvement is better than Sterling's over the last six, actually. But there's questions over his efficacy, of course, if Kevin De Bruyne is playing. And Bernardo, of course, has fallen off a cliff since his early season heyday, but did get an assist last week and put Sporting to the sword in the Champions League. Certainly something to consider, one of those two. I mean, you could get Peps. You could get Peps of those two. I mean, I could be kind of holding them up as great examples of X-Mins, but you could be Peps of those two. And but the thing is, at least if you get Peps with those two, you've got a better bench than if Sterling is given a rest and you're relying on the likes of Ben Johnson to do a job for you. De Bruyne himself, I think, is a bit too expensive for what he offers, to be honest. I mean, there's always a valid case to get him in the 1 week base if you are interested, but it does mean that you have to compromise elsewhere. So yeah, in summary on City, I think that Cancelo and Mahrez are both locked in. And to answer Fantasy Padia's question, which mid should I buy or which City attacker should I buy? Is it worth avoiding the FOMO? I think I probably feel like it's worth folding to the FOMO if I could possibly make a move. I'd be looking to kind of jot Mahrez into my team if I could to dodge that City FOMO. But I mean, it's really up to you how you do it, how you play it. You can probably just hope that, Frank Lampard's Everton and Frank Lampard, the master tactician, devised a plan to keep out Pep. City could slap anyone. Equally, they could just win 1-0 with a Laporta header or something like that in the 86th minute. I mean, Sterling for free hitters makes sense as the one to pair with Mahrez, and I've got him at the moment. But if Gundogan or Bernardo will stay to start, it may give me pause for thought, because relying on Ben Johnson for my main bench, for my first bench, is a little bit worrying to say the least if my picks go wrong. If you aren't free hitting, how worried should you be? Rather, I think, unfortunately. A City can obviously slap anybody, but with the concentration of alternatives created by diluting factors such as the absence of Liverpool lads, there could be a lot of points that are missed out on if you don't go with Man City here. Even if the actual number of own players won't be too impactful, say if you're in the upper echelons and you're trying to batten down the hatches. So I think ownership will probably help you a little bit. If you can stomach it, say you've got 2 free transfers or a dead ending, I would tempted to buy in someone like Mahrez for 1 week, but you might kind of hope that the well noted thing of City having multiple players who are involved with goals could save you in that the points be spread around. They won't be concentrated into one individual. There's no talisman there. I mean, you could buy a player in and hit them out again if you wanted to. Manchester Derby up next. Isn't that worrying either, is it? Anyway, on to Southampton. Steve at FPL Fairy was on a few weeks ago, another Irishman, asked about Southampton, the Saints. Where are we going to go with that, or where am I going to go with that? And is Livramento a risk to start? So let's take Livra first. I spoke to Lucy Hynett about it, who's unfortunately unwell at the moment. Get well soon, Lucy. She'll be on this pod very, very soon, joining me. I think at the start of next season. And she said that Livramento fundamentally isn't nailed. Perot has been playing very well, and it'll be harsh if he's dropped because he had COVID. And also Livramento has been carrying a knee problem. There's lots of games coming up for Southampton. See what the press conference says, basically. If Hasenhüttl says, you know what, Perot's not ready, he's not really kind of got over with COVID yet, then Livramento is probably likely to be all right. I've got Bednarek at the moment for two reasons. One, I'm not sure about Livra being nailed. Obviously, pending the Prezes, I just don't know if I want the 4.3 player who might be a bench worry, especially if I'm pursuing the Mahrez setup, having 1 or 2 players who might potentially not play. So another kind of iffy player doesn't feel like it's a good idea to me. And also, Norwich conceded a lot of headed chances and chances from set pieces. And Bednarek had the most big chances of any defender under 4.4 million, under 4.5 million this season. So at 4.4, you've got someone nailed who's got a modicum of threat. I mean, it's not loads and loads of attempts, of course, but could be something worth bearing in mind. Salisu at 4.5 actually has more headed attempts than Bednarek, but I can't really afford him in the setup. And KWP does fit the mold of this. He looks the most sort of nailed on of the fullbacks, and he's got okay goal involvement, but he's 4.8. It's up to you whether you have the moolah. Elsewhere, I think Brocha is the one that we're all going to own probably at that price. Why the hell not really? He's 5th for goal involvement amongst forwards over the last 6. And that price means that he really enables everything else. I think you could differentiate with likes of Shea Adams if you really wanted to. He's 6.7 Shea. But bear in mind his data is pretty much the same over Broja's in the recent term. It's just that he's been scoring and Broja hasn't. But it doesn't seem worth it to me. And even if you aren't free hitting, Broja seems worth a pickup now. He's got the Dublin 28 and may also have the game in game week 30. And to be honest, at that price, you can justify having holding him for perhaps the rest of the season. In midfield, I do think JWP is worth a shout. As I mentioned earlier, Norwich conceded a lot of chances from set pieces, and furthermore, they conceded the most penalties in the league this season with 8. Maybe one to bear in mind. Maybe one to bear in mind for the double game week as well. And he's one I think I wish I could fit in at the moment, but one perhaps you can live without too. But he could be one of those who could go off. And what's to say he's not going to get a penalty and have a free kick that hits top bins. Southampton wise, if you're not free hitting, how worried should you be? Defense wise, I wouldn't worry. It's a bit of a nothing defensive pick, isn't it? It's just an enabler. And they're so cheap that if you are worried for some reason, it might be worth picking one up because they've got a double in game week 28 anyway. Bednarek, Livramento, maybe even Saliso could be worth it. And the same logic applies to Broha, whose top 10K EO is likely to be very high next week, especially if they end up getting that 30. If they beat, I think I can't remember who they're playing in the FA Cup anyway. If they beat whoever their opponent in the FA Cup, they get game week 30. Sorry, if they lose, obviously, to their opponent in the cup, they get the game week 30. Either of them are worth owning, really, for the 28 at least. And Broha, you can just hold them for the rest of the season anyway. Will they splash up your rank too badly, though? Should you be worried if you're not free hitting? Probably not. Next question from Samant, and who asks Kane or Son or both, and Z, FPL Showman, or the artist formerly known as FPL Showman, I should say. Your thoughts on Jadon Sancho? Is it just a free hit punt or a decent alternative to Bruno for the rest of the season? So Samant asks about Kane, Son, or both. On a free hit, I think I'd be getting both of them. In fact, I've got both of them. If you're not on a free hit, I think I'd be happy with one of them, and that one probably be Son. Better value for money. But I've got Kane, as we'll discuss later. He's still racking up the numbers and showing what he could do against City. I just think on the free hit, both is well worth it. Kane particularly would seem to suit the Leeds game, given sort of player he is and the profile of Leeds defending. There could even be a sneaky pick of Kulusevski if you want to triple up on Spurs on the free hit, or maybe enable something somewhere else and maybe not go with one of Son or Kane, but that feels a bit risky to me. Should I be worried about those people if I'm free hitting? I assume if you're not free hitting, I assume you've got one of Kane or Son anyway, but as newly anointed most effective goal scoring pairing ever in the Premier League, not owning one could hurt you. I suspect it's probably not worth tearing up your team to accommodate both for 1 week, but they've also got defensively suspect Everton at White Hart Lane next week. So it might just be worth getting both if you think the victory versus City will spark a rampage. But obviously, they Spurs up against Burnley, so I'm not entirely sure about that. As I mentioned last week, they used to have 5 goals missing from their XG in terms of their expected versus their actual. Now it's 3, I think, due to they're 3 against City, but there's still a couple down. No, yeah, 2, I think it is now. But there's still that couple down, and they're still second to United of respected goals. And Z obviously asked my thoughts on Jadon Sancho. As I noted, I've got the double City midfield at the moment, so it means only one United player. If I did go 2 City defenders, Sancho would be in my sights to be drafted into that midfield slot. I think Bednarek would drop out, and I get him a City defender. Over the last 6 game weeks, Sancho is 4th for expected goal involvement. That's better than Sterling. He's actually ahead of Bruno if we look at a dangerously small last 4 game week sample. I really like him as an asset, actually, and kind of wish I could fit him in. There's a really good point on Guardian Football Weekly that he moved from being a very structured, from having a very kind of structured set of instructions on how he did things at Dortmund to more of a get out and enjoy yourself sort of mantra at Man United. And it's taken him a bit of time to adjust. But I think over the last kind of few weeks, to the eye and to the underlying stats, he's becoming the player United thought they'd signed. I'm not really interested in United's defence, by the way. High XUC at the moment comparatively, and they're held together with gaffer tape and De Gea saves effectively. The big thing for Sancho really is 2 questions. Unless you have mad team value, you've got to ask yourself these 2 questions. Do I pair him with Bruno? Maybe, but you miss out on 2 City mids or Son, which I wouldn't like. I'm still not too sure you can back United over City on a 1 game basis. I mean, Watford did just get dismantled 4-1 against Crystal Palace, so maybe they are now fodder, and maybe it is worth doing. But I don't know. I still kind of back City, but maybe I could change my mind on that one now. We'll see. And the other question you could ask is, should I get him instead of Bruno? Well, it could open some doors, of course. That's definitely something I could consider, especially at my OR. That could make a difference for me. Like, I've spoken about how I need money for a bench. Could Bruno to Sancho be the way I do it? I'm not sure. I think there'll be a major Bruno swell in effective ownership, and to the eye is looking back to a snarling best. So I wouldn't be able to avoid the feeling that I'm overplaying if I went with Sancho over Bruno. But I could be proven incorrect on the day. It could be that Sancho absolutely smashes it and Bruno does nothing. But yeah, I'm not too sure at the moment about Sancho and over Bruno. I do like the idea of pairing him with Bruno, but I'm not too sure about the double City defense right now. Should I be worried if I'm not free hitting? In general, United are a bit of an enigma, aren't they? Over the last 6 game weeks, they destroyed the expected goals charts, 12.5 from open play, three clear of Spurs and nearest rivals. I've seen chat of a switcheroo between Salah and Bruno, which could make sense as United could take Watford to the cleaners. Hodgson is going to set up to frustrate United, that's for sure. But Watford also look defensively pants by the sounds of it against Crystal Palace. So, yeah, they could run rampant there. I'm not entirely sure, but I could see why you'd be concerned, especially as there will be a swell of Bruno ownership amongst active managers. And you look at that game and just think, well, that's kind of a plum game that could be really, really impactful. I think Bruno's down to about 20% ownership now. I think that'll probably rise a little bit. I don't think he's going to get massive effective ownership, but that could be one to really think about. So there's a few kind of look at a few teams. I haven't spoken about Burnley yet. I'll talk about that just now in captain. So, who is the best captain this week? FPL Fledgling asks who's the best captain this week. He says he's considering Antonio to Veghorst and Salah to Son. He's wildcard in game week 28. And the captaincy for him is between Veghorst, Son, and Bruno, who he owns as well. And George, who hasn't got a free hit, says, where do I go with my captain this week? He's got the likes of Foden, Coutinho, who's currently bossed on, Che Adams, something like that. And FPL Chimp Paradox says, with so many of us using free hit in game week 27 and captain Veghorst, are we overlooking potentially better captain options in the single game week mold? So Kane and Son, Bruno, KDB, Mahrez, etc., etc. So for non-free hitters like George, I think the likes of a remaining City player or something like that is perfectly fine. If George has Foden, you could probably buy Mahrez or something like that and go for that if you're not convinced by Burnley. I'd not be against Son, for example, as Fledgling mentioned, who I suspect might be well suited for the Leeds game, nor Bruno versus Watford, of course. I'm going with Vehicle simply because I'm following my Mikel captaincy, but I can completely understand why Chimp Paradox mentioned we might be overlooking some single game week players. The one thing I would point out is that Leicester have conceded the most chances from set pieces, and Palace, if you were in Guaita at any point in the season, you'll know this, are also not very good at defending them. That's probably where I'll go with him, as long as he's not injured, which doesn't look like he is. And even if you aren't free hitting, it might be worth getting Veghorst in. There's lots of mini doubles to come. There's still 2 games to be rearranged for Burnley. He'll be hygiene very soon, so getting him in early could be worth it. On paper, quickly about Burnley, Big Voot and Pope look shooing to everyone on the free hit. The remaining question probably is about the third player. I suspect it's between me, who scored this evening, and Tarkovsky, with Tarko making his return from COVID tonight. I'm not sure on the fullbacks currently. Roberts and Peters are the two who are currently hanging out. I'm not sure they're going to play both games, both of them. Roberts especially because Lowton is fit. He's been muscled out by Roberts, sorry. But I'm not sure that there's not a threat of rotation there, or at least that Lowton doesn't get one of the 2 games. So I don't think he's quite for me. One to keep a lookout for is Stoke City legend Eric Peters at just 4.2. Taylor didn't make the bench tonight, meaning Peters may well play the double, and he's just 4.2, as I mentioned. There are no stats on the guy whatsoever. There's nothing I can say that commends him to you as a pickup. But that could be a way to enable everything else and make your bench that bit better in that kind of template Moraz sort of setup. But if you're looking for the safety of centre backs, there's very little between me and Tarko. The latter's 0.1 million more expensive. He's got a couple of more big chances over the course of the season. So I think I'll be going with Tarko, but it's really up to you and what you can afford. Elsewhere, I'm not really interested in Cornet in the midfield. He's fragile. He wasn't in the lineup tonight. And as I said last week, his constant worldies were frankly unsustainable, I think, especially now he's been shunted out on the wing, it seems, to accommodate J Rod. And I'm not interested in Dwight McNeil and co either, although Josh Brownhill, double game week 26 legend. Wow. Final, how worried should I be if I'm not on a wild card on Burnley? On a free hit, sorry, on Burnley. Probably not that worried. I mean, they're only in consideration because they've got a double, and as many have pointed out, it's an acute example of the occasional absurdity of FPL versus actual football. That a club whose Premier League status is looking in jeopardy is being considered by so many FPL managers. That's just the truth of it. Covering the likes of Veghorst, though, and maybe a defender, Me and Taka were too expensive, but the likes of Peters could be kind of drafted in as a bit of a whatever pick. Are affordable moves just to kind of give yourself that peace of mind, so that could be worthwhile. Vehicle could well hit 100% EO and top 10k this game week, I think. And there's also 2 rearranged games to come, so you could do yourself a favor and buy him here. I mean, I'll probably have to buy myself fairly soon. It relies on them if they get a game in game week 30. Should I be worried overall as a non-free hitter? I guess it's probably worth just mentioning. Ultimately, of course, totally depends on your team. How worried you should be about the free hitters if you aren't free hitting. I think that City and Bruno aside, if you're not willing to play a switcheroo, you're probably going to be okay. Those Bruno and the City guys are probably going to be your biggest threats, and the likely concentration of points around those particular teams this week who are on the fringes of or have recently exited the template could be concerning to you if you're not free hitting. That said, it's obviously all surrounding a game of maximal variance because it's just one game week. And there's nothing to say your team, as it is, won't outscore a free hitter team if things go your way. So think about, back when I free hitted, I can't remember what it was, but the game week when Salah had Leicester at home and he missed that penalty and they lost 1-0. I mean, that could happen. It is football after all. I mean, just good luck in general, but not so much luck. Not as much luck as I'll have. Not as much luck to me and my fellow free hitters, that's for sure. Moving on to a few other points. A few hold or sells going forward. A couple of questions from Dave CZFPL. The first one is Bowen a hold? No doubles. Wolves, Liverpool, Aston Villa are the next 3. And then he's got a blank game week 30. And there's Rafinha, JWP, Cornet, rubbish, and Saka out there who are potentially doing things. And they are also still in Europe. Is he worth holding on to? I mean, Jared, he's got the underlying data. He's second for non-penalty over the last 6 game weeks. Hit the bar this week. There's definitely a feeling I won't be using him for the next few weeks, though. That's for sure. I think I'll play him for that Villa game Dave mentioned, but I won't have him this week in my free hit. He'll probably be benched when he's against Liverpool, and game week 30 he's got a blank. That midfield is starting to look a bit crowded as well. Could it be that Bowen's the one to give up his spot? I can see why you would, especially if you've got immovables like Son, Salah, Saka at the moment, and so on and so forth. You don't want to sell. But I suspect a lot of managers have sufficient cash elsewhere to move on other pieces and not cash in bone quite yet, even if you might see a bit of a value drop over the next little while. Like, I wouldn't be too worried about selling either, though. Like, every season, as we've seen every season, players like Antonio, for example, present us with a real problem once they start to drop off. I mean, do I sell or keep? I'm not suggesting Bowen will drop off, but he could do. And normally there's merit to be had in shifting a player on early. Like it represents this opportunity versus those who are too scared to sell, Like in Antonio's case, the advantage of selling was muted a little bit, as all strikers have been tossed. But you could definitely make a case of selling Bowen to fit in, say, a Saka, could be worth it towards the end of the season. Like I'm probably going to hold for the next little period just because of what he offers as an asset. He's not in my free hit. I'll bench him versus Liverpool. I'll play him versus Villa, and then may hold him in 30. But I guess the key is he's not untouchable now. I'm not too worried if I did have to say goodbye to him. I think West Ham, due to a lack of squad depth, have been worked out basically by teams, and Bowen is carrying them. And Mikel Antonio hasn't really done anything for a while. He's been completely extinguished, hasn't he? So look, an amphinism. He's no longer untouchable in summary. So I'll probably be keeping him. But if there's an urgent sale to facilitate a doubler or something that will kind of be part of a grand scheme going forward, that means I'll have to sell him, I won't be too upset about doing so. Question 2 from Dave. Is Dean a hold? Villa look really poor at the moment. They do have Dublin 28, playing 30, but clean sheets and attacking returns don't seem very likely. So, yeah, they've been underwhelming. There was a really good article in The Athletic this week which points out that they played well for about 25 minutes against Leeds in terms of the last 8 game weeks, 1 win and 8, and they're definitely going through some teething troubles under Stevie G, that's for sure. They've got the double in 28 and a probable game in 30, so I'm holding Dean for now. And I've also got Buendia too. I'm probably going to continue that experiment, I think, but I might reassess next week if he has to go for someone like Rafinha or something like that. I mean, the Portents haven't been good, basically. I was very relieved to not bench boost this week because it would have been all relying on Villa doing well against Watford, and they also lost 1-0. Everything about them screams, a team in transition. That seems to be exactly what they are at the moment. They're aggressively mid-table on a lot of the recent data points. I wouldn't be going overboard to sign them up. There's no guarantee of results. There's a real sort of, don't buy, don't sell vibe about them given the fixtures. And if I need to sell off Buendia to buy a better option, I wouldn't be too aggrieved about doing so, even if he does pop up with something. Probably watch them versus Brighton and see how they go. And finally, Michael Lowe asks, was the enjoyment of Kane's masterclass against City worth the last few weeks? And when should those of us who have saved our triple captainships use them? Should they use them on him? So Kane's masterclass versus City was very nice. As I mentioned earlier, I was out and it was very nice to kind of see, oh, he scored a brace and probably should have got a hat trick as well. Well, it was correctly overturned the second, well, not second goal, but the goal he scored second, which was taken out. I just really bloody wish he'd done that against Southampton, Michael, after I wildcarded, that's for sure. He's had the number for ages and he's still in deficit to the tune of 4 goals this season. That's the first time he's underperformed his expected versus actual. But if you are sat with a triple captainship, Salah, upcoming double in 29, probably the best option compared to Kane and Spurs, who are still fairly fitful. It's very difficult to know which Spurs are going to show up. They won't play Man City every week, basically. Ah, dear. And final question, I think, this week, isn't it? Yeah, general FPL enjoyment. FPL Sponge, a good mate of mine, who I've seen on many meetups, and indeed wore a sponge to a meetup once, asks, are you enjoying FPL with the current fixture schedule? It's less chaotic than the random COVID postponements, and he thinks he's more engaged in standard seasons with only 1 or 2 double game weeks the whole season due to the FA Cup. So I am, mate. Actually, I'm really liking it. The extra doubles give you more hope, don't they? And the turnaround between the action makes it feel like there's less time to lick your wounds, and it's not like the drip feed of a couple of seasons ago. That was really bad, wasn't it? When everything was sort of magnified. There's football everywhere, like Mitchell and Webb style football, football, football all the time. Watch the football, watch it. I got a bit much having it like that. It's still sort of in sort of a specific burst of time, which is nice. And there are sort of there is time to go off and do other things. So, for example, I'm pretty obsessed with Horizon Forbidden West at the moment, and I'll be able to clang around on that half cut after this uploads. But it is very nice to see it kind of be something which is kind of quite exciting, and I think a lot of the time it hasn't been as exciting in past seasons because it's been quite straightforward what you do and how you play it. Whereas I think that now we've got a complex sort of chip environment towards the end of this season. And I think that hopefully will mean that things are going to be kind of more contentious, more interesting. People will suffer different fates, have different fortunes. And I think more than anything, it does get boring if everyone unites around one particular strategy. Like last few seasons, we've just seen that there's been kind of a few players that you should be buying. A very strong kind of template. The 200 club being very small, especially last season with Bruno, Son, Salah, and Kane. That if you had them, great, and you just kind of built the rest of the team around them, grabbed a few bandwagons, and that was it. I think it'd be really good to see having different ways to kind of approach this end of the season, attack this end of the season. Hopefully, that's going to lead to just a more interesting sort of FPL context, which gives us more to talk about than, oh, did you get Bruno this week? Yeah. Did you get Salah this week? Yeah. Son and Kane? Yeah, I own them both as well. So, they all had 100% EO, did all right. Did you move anywhere else? No, because the rest differentials are rubbish. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm really enjoying the current schedule. I'm really enjoying how FPL looks like it's going to be going. I really hope it continues that way. Brings us to the end. So just to mention again, I'm free hitting. My squad at the moment is Pope, Bednarek, Tarko, Cancelo, Son, Sterling, Mahrez, Bruno, Kane, their course captain, and Broha. I could change tack to remove Sterling for Bernardo or Gundo to upgrade that terrible bench. Or I could indeed be enchanted by Sancho and get him in for Bruno if I'm feeling spicy. We'll see. I think the way to beef my bench could be Peters in if Taylor is ruled out. That is so exciting. I can't contain myself. But I feel like the template will be fine. I'm sure it'll be all right. And if I do get pepped, then I won't be alone in being pepped. Don't forget that it's probably only going to be 1 in 4 managers at most who are on free hit this week. Even though it does look like everybody is on free hit, it's probably not the case. Right. That's it from me. Thanks very much for listening. I was who got the assist, I suppose. Correspondence, please send something in for Anthony if you can. The last pod from with him will be next Tuesday night. So that'll be I think it's on Tuesday, the 1st of March. So that'll be on Wednesday, the 2nd. We'll be back with you. Please send your correspondence in of anything that you'd like to say to Anthony. Nice things, preferably. Who got this at gmail.com. Speak to you all next week. All the best for your free hits or no free hitting. And whatever you do during double blank game week 27. Hope I assisted you. Speak to you very, very soon. Goodbye.